The weird thing about being hopeless is that there's usually some hope in it. When you're miserable, when you're suffering, when you're at the absolute bottom of life and feeling like you're ready for it to just be over, it seems relatively believable that if your circumstances improved, you wouldn't feel this way anymore, even if you don't believe that those circumstances can improve. There's at least hypothetical hope that a better life would lead to feeling better. But some people have managed to begin to climb out of that hole, piece together a life somewhat resembling the one that they wanted, and begin the process of acquiring all the things we're supposed to want from this existence, like a job and a house and a family. And we found that it doesn't change how we feel about being here as much as we had hoped or assumed that it would. People like us don't get a lot of recognition in our society because we're confusing. We tend to superficially divide people into two categories: struggling and unhappy, or thriving and happy. And when people cross categories, it's very confusing. If you've ever met a person who is struggling yet happy, like maybe someone who's living in poverty or has a chronic disability, but they seem like they're really enjoying life and happy to be here, those tend to be memorable encounters because they don't seem to feel the way we think we would feel if we were experiencing their circumstances. But there's a second cross category: people who are thriving yet unhappy. The people who have the things that most people would want out of life, yet seem to feel little or no satisfaction or joy from having them. And these people are rarely seen or acknowledged or understood for that matter, and they're who this content is for today. Suicidal ideation and completed suicide are often assumed to be associated with things like hopelessness, despair, depression, and other dark, heavy emotions. And when someone dies by suicide, who seem to have a pretty good life from the outside looking in, we often assume that there were some dark secrets about that person's life that weren't shared with the outside world. Like there was something going on behind the scenes that nobody knew about. And sometimes that's true, but it's not always true. Some people experience at least fleeting passive suicidal ideation, sometimes full-blown active suicidal ideation, who are legitimately living a pretty good life and genuinely enjoying it at least some of the time, which is a terrifying thought because it seems logical to assume that increased positive emotion would be the antidote to suicidal ideation when you have almost no positive emotion. But what are you supposed to do when your life improves, maybe even dramatically, and you don't feel any better? Or perhaps even worse, what if you do feel better and you still kind of want to die sometimes? That, for many people, is kind of the peak of hopelessness. It's the moment when you realize, I've gotten better, yet somehow nothing has really changed. Like, what if you climb to the top of this ladder that you never thought you could climb, only to realize there's nothing up here? I understand this conundrum because I've been both types of person. I've been the person at the absolute bottom of life looking up, seeing people who have normal lives that seem so far out of reach for me, daydreaming and fantasizing about how incredible it must feel to get to that normal functional level, even though I, quote, knew I never would. But I've also been the person who has ever so gradually dug myself out of my own grave, so to speak, and made steps forward to living that impossible normal life that I never thought I would have, and asking myself once I got there, why do I still feel like me and not the way I thought the people who had this life felt? For many people, this is the most dangerous phase of recovery because when you finally achieve those things that once seemed so out of reach and realize that you still don't feel the way you always imagined the people who had those things felt, there is a unique and all-consuming hopelessness and despair that comes with that. It's the feeling that this was all for nothing and there's nowhere else to go and there's nothing else to try. And this is where we sometimes lose people. This has apparently been a problem for thousands of years because there's a book in the Old Testament of the Bible called Ecclesiastes that addresses this topic, in my opinion, as well as anything modern, if not better. There is some debate about who wrote this book. Most people attribute it to King Solomon, who was sort of like a mix of Jeff Bezos, Vladimir Putin, and like the Dalai Lama all at once, if that makes sense. Unbelievably rich, unbelievably powerful, and unbelievably wise. And yet, despite all of that, pretty disenchanted with life. The book of Ecclesiastes basically says, I have everything. I rule over the 12 tribes of Israel. I have a massive army. I have hundreds of wives. Almost everybody respects me. My every whim is satisfied. And it kind of doesn't matter. I still just feel like a person with ups and downs and no lasting sense of joy or contentment. Solomon, of course, since it's the Bible, eventually points to Christ as the solution to these problems, but whether you believe that the Bible is the inspired word of God or just ancient philosophical writings doesn't really change the core point here that people have been feeling this way and struggling with this problem for a very, very long time. So this is not a new thing caused by smartphones or societal change or anything like that. It's just something that's built into some of us, and it's apparently been there for thousands of years. So what the heck do we do about this? You guys probably know I'm a big advocate of doing the hard work, of creating the change. Take care of your body, improve your relationships, fix your self-talk, get that promotion, clean your house, all the things, right? But for a lot of us, including me, these things are necessary but not sufficient in the equation of trying not to hate your life. They aren't enough for some people. They weren't enough for me. Once I got the education, the job, the house, and the family, I felt like a Christmas tree with no star on top, if that makes sense. Like, I knew it was better, but something was still missing, and I didn't know what it was or how to find it. In my journey so far, 42 years of it, I have found 3 things that, at least for me, can sit atop that star and give my life a sense of completeness. The first is what Abraham Maslow calls self-actualization. It's the 5th and final phase of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is basically a visual representation of what he considers to be the order of operations to human life, and it's a concept I generally align with. Self-actualization is a big concept. The simplest definition I can give is living up to your true potential. And this is something we generally cannot focus on or worry about until all of our more basic needs are met. So like me, I was constantly labeled as an underachiever in school, even in college, because my grades were usually around like middle of the pack, if not a little bit below. And many of my teachers sensed that I could do more. And in theory, they were right. I was intelligent enough to do better, but I was also horribly depressed and didn't care if I lived or died, so academics weren't a high priority. A person can have all of their basic needs met and still feel unfulfilled or unsatisfied if on some level they know they're still capable of more. The danger here is in stopping at a good enough life if good enough isn't good enough for you. And I know it's easy to think that it should be, especially if for most of it, you've not lived a good enough life. Like if you finally have things you've never had, maybe you think you should be satisfied, but maybe you're aware that you've always had a gift or a skill or a talent that your current lifestyle doesn't provide you with opportunities to use. Once you start to feel better and do better, that's where this can actually come into play. But at least for me, it wasn't a shift that happened automatically. And this is why I started doing things like writing books and making content for social media, because even though I was working full-time as a clinical psychologist and raising a family with my wife, something inside of me kept saying, you can do more than this. And I think as long as that voice can continue to accurately speak those words to us, we won't be fully satisfied with our lives. I don't know what self-actualization looks like for you. I'm still figuring out what it looks like for me. But if all of your basic needs are met and consistently met, yet you don't feel satisfied with life, I encourage you to look at this concept of self-actualization. And a good place to look, at the risk of sounding like a very stereotypical therapist, is your childhood. So a lot of times the things that make us unique or different, they bring unwanted negative attention to us in our younger years. So we learn to bury or hide these things because we get bullied or teased or picked on because they make us different. And maybe this is the time in your life to work on digging up some of those things you buried and letting them be a part of your life once again. The second thing is our values. We all have values, and sometimes our pursuits of certain statuses or achievements in life can cause us to move away from those values or even do things that contradict them. Like maybe in an attempt to get that next promotion and provide more financial security for your family, you spent a lot less time at home and you vowed you would never do that because that's what your father did, and you never felt connected to him because he was gone so often. Or maybe you had to pretend to agree with people who believe some things that you consider to be like awful or problematic in order to gain social status. And now you have that social status, but you feel unsettled with it. In my experience, living out of alignment with my own values creates an internalized sense of disgust that I find impossible to coexist with. It literally feels like there is rotting garbage inside of me. And looking back, I realized that starting in adolescence, I began to throw away many of my core values in an attempt to fit in, be like everybody else, be popular, be successful. This is hard to talk about, but I treated vulnerable people terribly. I jumped in on teasing and bullying to deflect attention away from myself. I abandoned people who needed me because they didn't fit the image I was trying to project. I did a lot of, frankly, terrible things, and I still experience some self-loathing about this. I'm a work in progress too, just like all of us. And one of my biggest endeavors in the past decade or so has been to reconnect with my core values and disengage myself from activities or habits or relationships that weren't in alignment with this. This has given me a better sense of inner connection with what I truly believe is what we're supposed to do as human beings. And for lack of a better term, it has helped me feel cleaner inside. I hope that makes sense. If you have that dirty, rotten trash feeling, it might be because your current lifestyle is in conflict with core values that you hold, and it might be worth re-examining that. The third thing for me is spirituality. If your brain is anything like mine, it has a very difficult to overcome objection that it can throw at me for just about any goal I've ever achieved, which is, so what? My default position, my null hypothesis for life is that all of this means nothing. And for most of my life, I haven't had a good comeback to that point. And so everything I've done, everything I've achieved, ultimately has felt pretty hollow and pretty empty because I don't know if it matters for anything beyond the present moment. I've spent most of my life somewhere between agnosticism and atheism. And even though I found no comfort or relief in those beliefs whatsoever, I felt like they were the morally and intellectually correct viewpoints to hold. In the past few years of my life, I have been reconsidering that and gradually moving away from it. I am by no means an expert on religion or spirituality. I also completely understand these are highly contentious topics for many people that are wrapped up in wounding or trauma. And I understand those feelings because I've had similar baggage and similar barriers around this topic for most of my life. So all I'm going to say here is maybe just stay curious about it. Try not to let the insensitive actions of other flawed or broken people take something away from you that could be the answer to the emptiness that you feel inside, the star on that top of otherwise complete Christmas tree, because there's got to be something more to it than this. There just has to be. This can't be it. Anyway, I hope that makes sense to you guys. This is a new topic for me. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. This sort of like happy suicidal ideation or content suicidal ideation, if this makes sense. I'm, as always, not sure if this is just a weird me thing. Well, I know it's not just a weird me thing because I do know some other people who feel this way or have felt this way, but I don't know how many of us this is. So please do let me know in the comments if this is something you want me to speak more on, or I will assume that if there are not very many comments on this video, this was not a super desirable topic. If you happen to be new here, and this is the first piece of content you've consumed from me, although I've not talked on this specific topic before, this is generally the kind of thing I do try to discuss, which is like when depression and anxiety and other mental health conditions look a little bit different from what we expect them to, and how those of us who maybe don't fit in with these kind of cultural stereotypes about what mood disorders and anxiety disorders look like can find our way, through a system that isn't really built for us. That's kind of what I'm about. Anyway, hope this helps. Hope you get some value out of it. Please let me know if you did, and I will see you next time. Take care.